Namaste, Shrikant Dada. Thank you so much for inviting me on the Shri Yoga platform to talk about meditation. We've come here and discussed yoga in the past. We've also discussed diet purification, Ahar Shuddhi. Today we are going to discuss meditation. I had done a session on meditation in Hindi, Dhyan Kya Hai? Because one of my sisters back home in India, she asked me, Dada, why don't you teach me meditation? I would like to do meditation. And I said, why don't you understand what meditation means first? And then we will figure out whether we want to do it or not, isn't it? Because most people don't understand, even I used to not understand the meaning of words clearly. If we understand the meaning of words clearly, and if that word creates the experience within us of what that word actually means, then we clearly understand what that word is, what it means, and then what do we do about it. Okay, so the word meditation in Sanskrit is called dhyan. Dhyan means to focus on a particular thing, to make our mind single pointed towards that thing. That is called dhyana. Now, dhyana happens to be the seventh step in the yoga practice. See, Ashtanga Yoga or the Eightfold Yoga Path, that is the practical guide to realize who we are. The prime purpose of human life is to realize who we are. Okay? And our essential nature happens to be existence, awareness, and bliss. Infinite bliss. Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma is how the reality is described in Vedanta. And Jivo Brahmaiva Napara, which means my identity is not different from the ultimate reality, which is Brahman, which is infinite. The word Brahman itself means infinite. Right? Unfortunately, we don't understand ourselves properly. We all misunderstand ourselves. We all mistake ourselves to be who we are not. Most of us believe, and most of us are completely convinced that this body is me, I am within the body, and outside is the world. That's how we live our life most of the years until we come to a Vedanta class. And then suddenly the teacher says, no, 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 you are not the body. Okay. And this is very easy to figure out because this body keeps changing constantly, isn't it? We were not downloaded from our mother's womb in this manner, isn't it? We came in as a little baby, isn't it? We grew gradually every moment until a certain age. And then we were expected to maintain that shape and then simply take in some material and make sure that all of that material goes out. None of that sticks. Okay. So there is a limit beyond which we cannot grow vertically. But thereafter, if we don't take care, then most of us or many of us grow horizontally. That's not a great thing because if we grow horizontally, then our quality of life declines. Our quality of life is great only if our body is completely healthy. It is in the kind of shape it needs to be for any age. Okay. And it is maintained as long as we are around, isn't it? So, yoga will give us the practical method as to how to get there. Okay. And once we get there, then mind gets controlled. Okay. In fact, the Yoga Sutra starts with this verse Atha Yoganushasanam. Then about the mind. Okay, so it says Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Right? Atha Yoganushasanam, then Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. So a lot of people get stuck with this and they work on yoga chitta vritti nirodha, chitta vritti nirodha. Chitta vritti nirodha means stopping the thoughts arising in the mind. Okay. Vrittis are thoughts in the mind. So somehow stopping them. And yes, there are techniques available to stop thoughts arising in the mind. And in deep meditation, that is what yogis will achieve. About that, there is no doubt. But why do we do that? We do that because tada drashtu swarupe avasthanam. That's the next verse or aphorism. Next sutra. That next sutra says that once you do that, tada drashtu swarupe avasthanam. So the seer or the yogi, the observer, will reach his real nature. Swarupa means our own nature. Swarupa. Rupa means nature or shape, I guess. And Swa means self, the true self. So yoga practice will ultimately lead us to realize who we are. Okay, and that is the ultimate goal of all human life. Because that is where joy is infinite. You see, we are always doing something or the other for seeking joy, isn't it? Nobody is here who is deliberately seeking misery. Nobody is doing that, right? Everybody is in the pursuit of happiness, pursuit of joy. So whatever we do, if we want to get something, we want to get it because we will be happy after getting it. That's what we think. If we want to get rid of something, then also we are doing it because we want to get rid of it, or we will be happy by getting rid of it, isn't it? So a lot of people get married because of course they want to be happy, but then they get disillusioned and then they get divorced. So the one who was getting married to be happy, and the same one who wanted to get divorced is wanting to get divorced because he wants to become happy, isn't it? The people who are here in this meeting right now, they are here because they want to be happy. All right. And the people who are not here, those who are enjoying their evening, drinking or eating or watching a movie or doing anything else, we cannot condemn them because they are also seeking the same thing we are seeking. We are seeking happiness through this activity, and some people are seeking happiness through the activity they are doing because they think that that activity will make them more happy than this activity. So our happiness or our idea of happiness is very subjective. All right. So what I like, somebody else may not like. What I dislike, somebody else may not dislike. So let's not get too carried away with these likes and dislikes. Okay. Let's figure out what we are seeking and whether that seeking is going to lead us to infinite happiness or infinite joy. So anything that we pursue which is limited in time and space cannot give us unlimited happiness. About that we should be sure, because say let's take the example of a thing. Okay, so let's say this phone. Okay, before I had the phone, I did something to get the phone because I thought that after getting the phone I'll be happy, right? So until I get the phone, I have to do something, I have to make sure that I have enough money in the bank to go and buy the phone, right? So to make sure that that happens, I have to do something. And in the pursuit of earning money to buy whatever I want, there is pain involved, isn't it? But once I get the money, once I buy the phone, then I get the phone. All right. Then if the phone happens to be very expensive and all that, very valuable, then I have to be very careful holding on to it and protecting it so that it doesn't get stolen away or I won't forget it somewhere else. So there is still an anxiety that I should maintain it. And then if I actually lose it, somebody steals it or I drop it or I forget it somewhere, then there is misery, isn't it? So the very thing I was thinking was going to bring me joy is actually a source of sorrow or misery, because in the process of getting it, there is pain involved. In the process of maintaining it, there is anxiety involved, and in the process of losing it, definitely there is misery involved, right? So this is about a thing. In the same manner, even about an event, we talked about the marriage. So I want to get married because I want to be happy. and then I'm disillusioned, so I want to get divorced, isn't it? So we human beings will not remain equally happy with five different things. Desha, Kala, Vastu, Vyakti, Paristhiti. Desha means place. You see, if we stay at one place for a long time, then we feel like going for a vacation. And when we go for the vacation, initially we feel good, but at the end, we feel like coming back home, isn't it? So we are not really satisfied with the place, Desha. Then Kala means time. We feel that right now is not the best time. When I was a child, that time was really good. Okay. So we are not satisfied with the time we are in. So we think that at a different time we'll be more happy or more joyful. Desha Kala. Vastu means I just told you about the thing. Then Vyakti means a person. I told you about the marriage. And Paristhiti means situation. So we feel that, this situation right now in my life is not the best. I should have a different situation. So not being fully satisfied with the situation. Those are the five different things in which we think we are going to become happy or we are going to get happiness through them. That is an error because these are limited in either time or space, right? So anything that is limited can only give us limited joy, and we will not be interested in that same thing all the time. So just imagine our own life. When we were children, we were interested in toys. Then we grew up and then we became teenagers. Then we wanted bicycles. Then we grew up further and then we wanted some kind of two-wheeler when we were in India. And then we grow up further, then we want a four-wheeler, a car. And then once we get enough money, then instead of an ordinary car, I want a Mercedes or a BMW or Maserati or whatever. I don't know. I don't have any such cars. I just know these names. Okay. I have a Toyota Prius hybrid. I'm an environmental engineer, so at least that much green I should be, isn't it? So just giving you these examples so that you can understand this concept from our day-to-day life, from our everyday examples and our everyday experiences. Okay. So what do we do to be infinitely, and not infinitely means infinitely in time as well as space, infinitely happy? That happiness or that joy can come only when we find something which is infinite which is not limited in any time and space, infinite and eternal. Okay. Luckily, we don't have to go anywhere to find it at all. That is our essential nature. What happens is when we get a thing, or when we find somebody, or when we are in a good situation, when we are in a good place, then we lose the desire for that thing or person or situation because that becomes a part of us. Okay. So to that extent, for that period, the desire for that thing or that person goes away. See, once I get this phone, then this phone has become a part of me now. I have included that as a part of myself. Or this is now mine. Now I don't have a desire for this anymore, isn't it? So that's what happens. When I get something which I was desiring, once that desire is fulfilled, then with respect to that particular thing, I don't have a desire anymore. And not having a desire in my mind is joy. So happiness is equal to not fulfillment of desire, but happiness is equal to not having desire. Right? Now, how do you operate without any desire at all? That's why to regulate our life, in the Gita, I study that as a living manual or a manual of life, how to live. Okay. So as long as I'm assuming that I'm this body, I must use this body for serving others. Okay. Because the joy we get by consuming something only for ourselves is less than the joy we experience when we share. Ask any mother. Every mother would like to feed her child and her family before she eats. And at times, or many times, she may not eat anything at all. She will feed the child, and in the process of feeding the child itself, she will be satisfied. So when we expand our sense of self, initially I'm by myself, okay, then I expand, I bring one more person in my life, I get married. Then I expand further, I have a child or maybe two children, and then this way my consciousness expands, right? The more it expands, the more joyful I become. The more I am giving rather than taking, the more joyful I become. This is what I understand from within me. Okay. So, what about meditation? Where is meditation in all this? See, meditation is also done because we want to be joyful, we want to be happy. So, what should we meditate upon? See, as long as I don't have this phone, then I'm meditating upon how am I going to get this phone, right? So, in this, but I have understood that this phone is going to make me happy only for a short duration. Or phone is just an example, anything in the world, right? But if I understand that my own essential nature is actually existence, unlimited joy, and awareness, right? If I understand this in this manner, then that is what I will pursue. In the Gita, in the 15th chapter, Krishna tells Arjuna, Vedaishcha sarvairahameva vedyo vedantakrit veda videvacha aham. Okay. He says that Vedaishcha sarvair ahameva vedyo. All the Vedas are declaring unanimously, unambiguously, emphatically that I, the true I, is the one worthy of knowing. That is the ultimate goal of human life, to know who we are. Okay. So how do I get there? I have to contemplate on that. I have to meditate upon that. See, in this meeting, you just came to know from me, or we come to know from the gurus, that Tatvam Asi, the ultimate reality, is you. So you are the source of existence, awareness, and infinite joy or infinite bliss. That's what the teacher tells us. But we don't have any experience of it. Okay, first we have heard. That is called Shravana, means I have heard. The next thing is I have many doubts in my mind. I consider myself to be the body. Okay, scientifically I can tell you, or we can understand that this body is not us because this body has been changing from day one until now. But I don't have any experience of change. You know, my awareness of my being, I am, that doesn't change. That doesn't change at all. It has not changed even a bit. It hasn't increased or decreased. It has been the same since day one. When I was a child, I was the same. When I was a teenager, my awareness of my being has been the same. Okay. I may think of myself as a teenager because I'm identified with the body. Then I become an adult, or my body goes through adulthood. Then the body goes through middle age, and then the body becomes old eventually. But I am the same, isn't it? So these changes I am observing. I am the observer rather than the change. If I understand this, then I'll come back within myself. Okay. What is changing in the world is the world. But how is the world experienced by me? The world is experienced by me through my sense organs as sensations in my mind. That is how the world is experienced by me. Unless the world creates an impression or a sensation within my mind, I don't even know that the world exists. So, for example, when we go to sleep in the next couple hours, after that, where will the world disappear? The world may be wherever it is, but I don't experience it because my mind and my sense organs have shut down. So when my mind and my sense organs shut down, the world disappears. So the world appears only under a specific set of conditions, that my sense organs have to be on and my mind has to be ready behind these sense organs to receive the sensations or the impressions of the world. Otherwise, the world doesn't exist. See, if we sit down closing our eyes and focus only on our breath, for example, this is what a lot of us do while meditating, isn't it? So just sit down and do meditation or observe your breath. The whole world disappears because we are now focused on that one activity of breathing, right? See, meditation basically is that because it will create a distance between what we consider ourselves to be and what we truly are. Okay. As long as we are identified with this body and we consider this world to be real, we are far away from ourselves. Okay. We have to understand that this world as it appears is only an appearance in a certain set of conditions, right? Once we understand that, then we will stop being enchanted by and enamored by the world. Then we will come within. We will start inquiring, who am I? Who is the one who is getting all this experience? Once we come within us, that coming within us is basically changing the direction. All our life, our direction has been outward, toward the world, toward what is called in Sanskrit the Vishaya. Vishaya means objects of sense organs. So there are 5 different kinds of objects corresponding with the 5 different sense organs we have. We have 5 senses, right? Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, Gandha. Shabda is sound, Sparsha is touch, Rupa is vision, Rasa is taste, and Gandha is smell. So the world is experienced by us through these 5 sensations. Okay. If one of them is not working, God forbid somebody is blind, or even if we close our eyes, then we will experience the world only through 4 senses. Shabda, Sparsha, Rasa, and Gandha, no Rupa. That's what will happen, right? So when we understand that this world, as we experience through our sense organs, is actually an appearance, it doesn't have independent existence apart from the reality we give through our sense organs, right? Once we understand it in this manner, then we are no longer enamored by it. We will do things as necessary. We will live our life to the extent it is necessary. We will eat whenever we are hungry. We will continue to collect things to the extent they are necessary and useful, but not collect anything beyond that. So our life will become simpler. Our life will become almost minimalist. That's what will happen. When that happens, then meditation or focusing on something single pointedly will become possible and easy. That's what will happen. See, in yoga practice, we have yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, and then dhyana, and then ultimately samadhi. Right? These are the 8 different steps of yoga practice. Now, of course, we can pick up whichever practice seems to be easiest for us, and then other things will start becoming easier, okay, depending upon our aptitude. In my case, I started this entire practice through pratyahara. Pratyahara means anti-ahara. Ahara means to consume, and pratyahara means not to consume. So I did experiments for the last, I would say, 3.5 years, and they were all quite scientific in the sense I am a chemical environmental process engineer, and I took my body as the experimental reactor. Okay, in this reactor, I tried to figure out what are the things coming in, how the things are getting processed, and what is going out. At steady state meaning this thing is in a dynamic state of equilibrium. So the things coming in are equal to the things going out, and nothing is accumulated. Okay, and things that need to get transformed will get transformed properly. So if we can maintain the dynamic equilibrium in our life at any age, then this remains very, very healthy. Okay. So I did the experiments on purifying what was going in and making sure it was getting processed properly, so that what went out or what is being manifested is as pure as it can be. That experiment was so successful and it was so wonderful. It felt so great from within. I learned so many things through this experiment. I learned that, this is what I should be pursuing. I should be pursuing, who am I? I should be trying to find the answer to that question. I should be meditating on that question. That is the question I should focus on. Okay. Everything else we do is okay in its place. We have to continue our life in this world and we have to make sure that our needs are met, our bills are paid, all those things we will do, we'll continue to do. But we will not get too enamored by that and we will not get stuck in it. So we will live our worldly life to the extent it is necessary. Do all the yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, and then dhyana or meditation will happen. You see, in true meditation, the meditator disappears. See, as long as I, the meditator, is wanting to do meditation, meditation doesn't really happen at all. Meditation is just any other activity, right? In true meditation, the meditator disappears. Only the awareness remains. In that awareness, the sense of otherness completely disappears. That is actually our everyday experience anyway, but unfortunately and by mistake, we consider otherness to be real. You see, think of our own experience, everyday experience. As I said, we experience the world through these five senses. So, whatever I'm seeing to be the world outside, I don't really see that as it is. It creates an impression in my mind. So, let's look at my picture on your screen. That picture is being reflected on your retina as an inverted image, and that image is being read by your mind in your vision center. That is how you are seeing me on the screen right now, isn't it? The screen is not entering your eyes. If the screen enters your eyes, you'll become blind. So the world doesn't really enter us. The world is experienced by us as impressions in our mind. These impressions and what we see out in the world, they are basically mirror images of each other. Okay? Neither of them has independent existence. They are both interdependent. If the world is not there outside, then it will not create an impression within me. So when does the world disappear? When I go to sleep. Then it doesn't create the impression. And unless the impression is created, the existence of world outside is not understood. So even right now, if you close your eyes, I will disappear, isn't it? So when I understand the nature of the world in this manner, and I meditate upon who am I, who is the real I, and I focus on that, I meditate on that, I remain in that awareness all the time. That is the third step in the study of Vedanta. The first step was Shravana or listening, that I am infinite or I am blissful and I exist. The second step was Manana or trying to figure out whether this is how this is true. So we'll have many questions. The teacher has told us that you are divine or you are infinite, but I don't have that experience. So I will have many questions. So I will ask many people, including my guru or whoever I meet, isn't it? Try to figure it out, clarify my doubts, study the scriptures. Because one of the things in Niyama, in my yoga practice, was what? Swadhyaya, isn't it? Yama was Ahimsa, Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha. Those were the five Yama. And the Niyama were Shaucha, Santosha, Tapa, Swadhyaya, Ishvara Pranidhan, right? So this Swadhyaya thing is the study of the self. If we continue to contemplate on that, see, initially we were told, then we did the manana or inquiry, and then now we are convinced that I am infinite, blissful awareness. I have understood that. Okay. but then I don't have that experience continuously. So we want to focus on that and continuously remain in that awareness. So if something bad happens, then of course we should do what we need to do to correct that situation. I'm not saying that we should continue to live poorly or we should become completely careless. Of course we should do what we need to do, what we must do to make our life go smoothly. Okay? We should not become inactive. So like Bhagwan says in chapter 2 of the Gita, Karmani eva adhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phala heturvu mate sangostva karmani. Sangha astu akarmani. So we cannot remain attached to inaction. We have to continue to undertake action, but what kind of action? That action which will be beneficial for the totality rather than benefiting me by myself as a separate entity. My idea of separateness is actually an error. My true nature is awareness, existence, and bliss, infinite bliss. Sat means existence, Chit means awareness, and bliss means Ananda, and Ananta means infinite. So that is my true nature. We have to meditate on this. Okay, if we can do that, if we can do this at all times, we will live meditatively. So the bottom line here is wherever I am, whatever I am, whenever I am, I will be 100%. So when I am doing this right now, I should be 100% a speaker, and you all should be 100% listeners. While we are listening, if we are thinking of what we will do after this session, then you are not listening attentively. If I am thinking of what I am going to do after this session, I am not speaking attentively. So I am not doing this activity meditatively. When each of our activities becomes meditative, then meditation happens, and meditation does not need to be done. So meditation is not something we do, but meditation is an experience within when we live in a certain manner. Okay. I hope and I pray that all of us will live our entire life, every moment of our life, meditatively in this manner and be happy at all times. Thank you. I'm going to open this forum for questions and comments. So if you would like to say something, first you unmute yourself and say, but one at a time would be great. Thank you for listening to me for about half an hour as promised. Yes. Any comments?
Thank you, Vikram. And
You're
if
most
anyone
welcome.
has comments, just please, the forum is open, so please ask one at a time. Thank you. Go ahead.
So I have a question, Vikramji. So
Yes, Ruben.
so meditation, like you said, that it is a focused on particular things. So if you try to focus initially, like say, if I understood correctly, like 5 minutes, then you gradually increase and then do it. And you engage your mind in certain way, then it is meditatively. And also I learned that with pratyahara, it helps you to do this more meditation. So what is the limit of pratyahara? Means, is there any limitation? Means everybody cannot do this what you have suggested or like this, but how you can do some pratyahara and some not? Means, is it able to achieve it or not? Or
That's a good
just
question.
need
So
a guide.
let's talk about Pratyahara a bit. I have actually done 2 elaborate sessions on Pratyahara. Pratyahara means to consume only to the need level. Okay. So if I'm hungry, I should eat. Whatever we need, we get the sensation for it, no? Always. So whatever we need for living in this world efficiently, we should acquire absolutely, depending upon what we are doing in life. So you are a mother, you are a wife, so you are going to run the household. So if you want to cook your food or cook your food for the family, then you have to make sure that you get the right kind of grocery, you have to have the right kind of cooking paraphernalia, hot plate, cooking utensils, if you are baking something, then the oven and things like that. So you need to make sure that all of these, this is called the upakarana. Upakarana means basically equipment. You need all kinds of equipment for living your life properly, and we must live our life properly using all kinds of upakarana or equipment we need, but not get stuck in that. Okay. So we should live our life to the need level, not try to live our life to the want level or the greed level, because there is no end to it. Often I give this example that if we need to swim, then to swim comfortably, we will need only about 6 feet deep water, isn't it? Even if the water is 600 feet deep, we will still need only 6 feet deep water to swim, isn't it? Even if I have a whole truckload of food in front of me, I can eat only to my stomach's capacity, isn't it? So we should understand where those limits are. When we limit our life in this manner, then dharana, dhyan, samadhi become easier. Okay, that is why Patanjali Muni has written all these Yoga Sutra, isn't it? Otherwise, why would he tell us to do all these things? See, when we have too many things, then there is an invisible bond between that thing which I call as mine and myself. And the more such bonds we have, the more stuck we are in that web of things around us. Just see, now in your life, you consider if you have a lot of stuff in your attic or in your garage or wherever, which you haven't used for a while, when you get rid of it, either through garage sale or you just donate it to Goodwill or Salvation Army or whoever, don't you feel light?
Yes. Yeah.
So getting rid of things is actually much more joyful and liberating than acquiring things. Those people who have moved from one place to another, they realize this. Every time they move, they say, oh my God, how many things have I accumulated between the last move and this move? But ultimately, we are not going to carry all of those things with us, isn't it? Everything on this planet is going to remain on this planet when we leave this planet. So we don't need to unnecessarily increase the number of things in our life. So pratyahar is only to consume what is necessary. That is called pratyahar. Pratyahar is not, I'm not recommending that we all leave everything and then go to some cave in the Himalayas or in the Shenandoah Mountains or whatever. No, you live in your own house. Our Swamiji, my guru, who I consider my guru, he said somebody came to him one time and he said, I want to go and live in Himalayas in a cave or whatever, right? So he said, don't worry, you go to the local shop, some painter, and paint a plate. And on that plate, you write CAVE and put that in front of your room and stay there. Don't go anywhere. Otherwise, after going to Himalayas in the cave, you will try to figure out where is the toilet. There is no toilet. So that's what happens. So we don't have to do, excessive life. And we don't have to deprive ourselves either. But understand and be aware that these things are only temporary and they are only temporary conveniences. So if we live our life to the need level, that is pratyahar. And once we do that pratyahar, dharana, dhyan, samadhi become easier. So thank you so much for this wonderful question. दुसरा आपल्याला एक प्रश्न होता ना, you had a question? मला तुमचं नाव आठवत नाही. Go ahead please. SAPALE कोणाचं नाव?
मला नाही मी ऐकत होते.
Go ahead, please. Because you are unmuted, so I thought that you wanted to say something. Why don't you go ahead?
या तुमचं हे खूपच छान झालं.
Uh-huh.
काय होतं?
Yes.
अगदी समजण्यासारखं सांगितलं तुम्ही.
Okay.
काही कन्फ्युजन वगैरे नव्हतं. मला फक्त एकच प्रश्न आहे की ह्या सगळ्याचा मथितार्थ असा आहे की डिटॅचमेंट आपण म्हणतो की
Absolutely.
व्हायचं नाही असंच आहे ना म्हणजे.
Right. So what our sister was saying here is the bottom line or the crux or the essence of whatever we have discussed so far is detachment, right? You see, attachment is itself an illusion. We think we are attached, but we are not really attached to anything at all, because our essential nature is unattachable. Okay, our essential nature is nirlep. Okay, it's non-stick. Nothing sticks to it. See, our body is not sticking to us either. Every moment the body is changing, and we are apart from the body. Okay, we are not within this body. This body is within us. As I speak, some molecules of carbon dioxide are going out of this body. And as I breathe in, some molecules of oxygen are coming in. So at the molecular level, this body is changing every moment. And am I stuck to this body? Absolutely not. Every night, each one of us leaves this body. Okay. I used to have a child's body at one time. Am I attached to it? If I have lost it, have I gone somewhere to lodge a complaint that I have lost it? No, I was never attached to it. I am not attached to this body. Any and all attachment is notional and it's in our mind. It's not real. Attachment itself is an illusion. I am attached to something or somebody is an illusion. I'm not saying that we should not fulfill our obligations to our family, to our children, to our parents, to our job, or to our society. No, these are all practical things we must do. But within ourselves, we should know that we are only playing roles. So when I am with my wife, I am playing the role of the husband. When I am with my children, I am playing the role of a father. If I am doing something for a client, I'm playing the role of a consultant. Right now, I'm playing the role of a speaker. So if we understand that we are only playing roles, but my essential nature is not this, that's all we need to contemplate on and meditate upon at all times. Ramesh Dada is saying that meditation helps us to recognize Brahman within and be in it. Yes, absolutely. Tada drashtu swarupe avasthanam. Absolutely. In fact, I'm eagerly waiting for Ramesh Dada to do a session on yoga because he has done tremendous study on Yoga Sutra. So one of these days, hopefully it will happen. So there was one other question or comment here.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you.
You're most welcome. So Ramesh Dada is saying contain expectations and reactions. Yes, absolutely right. Ramesh Dada, do you want to unmute? Oh, no, I think Dilip Dada is unmuted, right? So go ahead, Dilip
Yes.
Dada. Please. Krishna ji, I'm coming to you also. Huh? After Ramesh Dada, Dilip Dada finishes, then I'll come back to you.
Vikram, I really like the way you explain meditation as focus on the activity that you were doing. And that is so true. And you notice that visibly when the musicians sing and they go into the seventh cloud, seventh heaven, and they don't know what they're doing because they're so focused on whatever they are doing. Scientists are known to have done that. You and me and every one of us have experienced this when we were engaged and engrossed in writing, reading, or doing some activity. And I think that's a beautiful definition of meditation. My other comment is on the detachment. Detachment many times is perceived as proactive, so you give up something. However, the nature of individual is pursuit of happiness, because ultimately you're going for eternal bliss. And when you start going for higher and higher level of happiness or bliss, the lower and lower level automatically gets dropped off.
Absolutely.
You don't have to make an effort. So the example for the next generation I give is when you are a child, you want a tricycle. Then you have a bicycle with the training wheels. Then training wheels go away. Then you have a 10-speed bike. At the age of 16, you want dad's car. And after your first job, you get a Ferrari or some sports car.
If you have a job like that.
Yeah, okay. But when you get dad's car, you have not deliberately given up, but you have found something much better, much higher. And I think what I understand from the scriptures is as you get more and more meditative, as you get more and more engrossed or connected with the Brahman, you find more and more bliss in that. So the rest of the material pleasures of life, whereas you can enjoy them, but they don't mean as much to you.
Correct.
And you come to a stage where you have found much, much higher happiness. That's why you see many of these swamis, they are full of bliss, although they have nothing. Because not that they have deliberately given up, but because they have found something much higher. And I'll let Vikram clarify or correct me if I'm wrong. But one question I have for you to give some insight to the listeners is one of the questions, one of the areas meditation can help is to quiet the mind. And that meditation could be just without doing any specific work. And that is referred to in Bhagavad Gita. And I would love to hear a few comments from you on that subject of, let's say, going to bed and you cannot sleep, and you sit and meditate, and or yoga nidra or any of that. So would love to hear your comments, because you are very well experienced in that field.
All right. Thank you, Dilip Dada, for such a wonderful comment. First of all, I agree with you that when we experience higher bliss or a higher level of joy, then the lower level of joy or happiness or the lower pursuit of happiness will simply drop. That is absolutely correct. So after that, the question you had asked was about, in the Gita, it is either anekagrata. During the waking experience, we are focusing on many different things. So our mind is running from one place to another. That is called anekagrata, or focusing on multiple things at the same time. And the other option for the mind typically is shunyagrata, right? But ekagrata is what we are looking for. See, meditation means ekagrata. So we should focus on only one thing at a time. That one thing can be anything. That one thing could be your breathing or breath. That one thing could be, a jap that you do, Jai Shri Krishna or Jai Shri Ram or Om Namah Shivaya, or whatever jap your guru must have given you, or Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Somebody told me that this Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare is the scriptural mantra. But then this mantra was supposed to be narrated or chanted only by the trained people, right? So therefore Chaitanya Mahaprabhu reversed it. He says you start with Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Then he said, then anybody can chant. So whether that is true or this is true, or whether this will help or that will help, you can figure it out yourself. Okay, whatever mantra, what this mantra actually does, or what chanting helps us with, is during that chanting process, other thoughts don't enter our mind. That is how it is supposed to be done. The way to do it is, when you chant, you should chant it loudly, and then you should listen to your own chanting. If you do this attentively, that itself can be meditation. Okay. You can also do meditation by listening to silence. In fact, the purpose of this chanting is to ultimately listen to silence. So when we chant something, say Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. I have done that 3 times, right? How do I know it is 3 times? Because between these chants, there was a period of silence. Ultimately, we want to focus on that. Even when we do the japa or the chanting of Om, Om, after that makara, after that humming, there is a silence. Stay in that silence. See what happens. There was one comment here that why not Shunyagrata? Why not? See, Shunyagrata means we'll go to sleep. Then we are not in awareness anymore. We do experience bliss, and in fact, all of us want to go to bed, want to go to sleep for that very reason. We want to go to sleep because we want to experience bliss, but that bliss is experienced in unawareness. That is Shunyagrata. Ekagrata means we are focused on one thing and we are infinitely blissful because our mind has quietened down. That is Ekagrata. That Ekagrata can happen with many different things. As Dilip Dada just said, if I'm focused on this talk, it is meditative. It is meditation for me. Scientists do that all the time. Musicians do that all the time. In fact, unless the musician forgets himself. In fact, the greatest vocalist of my lifetime, Pandit Bhimsen Joshi, Bharat Ratna, he was asked by one of his listeners, or during an interview, somebody asked him, why do you sing? So he said, during singing, I forget myself. So in the deepest meditative state of singing, only the music remains. Nada Brahma remains. The musician, the singer disappears. And he used to experience that state many times, all the time. That is the reason his music and his singing used to penetrate our deepest consciousness. You know, after listening to a Bhimsen Joshi concert, that Tanpura would ring in my mind for 2-3 days continuously. I would think that the Tanpura is running in my mind. That's how powerful it was. It didn't happen with anybody else. It happened with him. Whenever I used to go and listen to Bhimsenji, that's what happened to me. Used to happen to me at all times. It's a fantastic example of meditation. But Shunyagrata is sleep. And when we sleep, of course, we experience that, but in unawareness, not in awareness. So we want to experience that in awareness. That's why Ekagrata is necessary. You know, Krishna here has been wanting to talk or say something for the last several minutes, and I have been keeping Krishna waiting. So, Krishna, can you please unmute yourself and say something? You have to unmute yourself, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I was exposed to most of the things that you mentioned through our scriptures and through gurus. That what you see is basically it cannot enter your body. You want a BMW or a big car, something like that. After buying it, you just keep it in the driveway, and after 2 days, you get tired of it. So I was exposed to various meditation techniques, tried different. But the one by Ramana Maharshi, Who Am I, is very impressive, but I couldn't progress much. You talked about it. I would like you to comment how to go about it. Second thing is, Nisargadatta Maharaj is very assertive. There's no inquiry. He just says, I'm that. And he did that for 3 years and he reached that. So you have these two paths along that. One is the who am I? Then basically whether to go about who am I? I'm not this. I'm not the body. I'm not the mind. And then because for me, even though I'm a thinker, I'm also a chemical engineer like you. I mean, analyst, do many things, and then I became a computer scientist. But basically, how do you go about that? Who am I? So who am I? And then I'm that. And the third thing is, what you talked about pratyahara and other things. There were times like even during my college years, I would go and fast in 40 days at a time. And like that, I could do for months, and maybe for 10, 15 years, I could control my intake of the food, and I was not interested just by the taste of the tongue. Like, and also for some reason, I read something when I was in college days, and that made me go into 40 days fastings. I did this, but now it's not that easy. But the third thing which you didn't mention is, see, people, it takes time for people to practice these methods like pratyahara and who am I and other things. But on the other hand, there are practical techniques like just vipassana techniques, observing the breath, candlelight meditation, and there are numerous meditations. Also, what I noticed is, because I teach yoga and meditation, but different types of meditations suits different people based on their personality.
Agreed.
Like I'm more of a Gnan Marga. For my type, like who am I, those things. Although I did make some progress in the meditative practices. And one thing false that I found, I don't know if it is false, that in the meditation technique that people teach, like even the gurus, is that they make you visualize, but it is anti-meditation. The very process of meditation is where you want to be bereft of thoughts, but then they want to visualize something in the sky, something there, something here, and then you are activating the mind. So I was not comfortable with that. So at the most, like I thought, like Vipassana and observing the breath were practical aspect. They're very good meditation techniques. But Nisargadatta Maharaj, I liked it, but you need to have that much faith to do that. So what I could know from you is like, who am I? Anything that you want to elaborate?
Right. So what you said is absolutely correct. I agree with you that different people will have different techniques. In fact, there are as many techniques as there are people. Because for us, our path is going to be very unique because each one of us is at a different location on our spiritual journey, right? So when we are in a state of mind, when we think that we are the body, at that time, with this body, we should do karma yoga. Okay, we should do service for everybody, or we should do whatever we are doing with the benefit of the totality in the mind rather than my own selfish benefit. That's the path of karma yoga. And even after one realizes one's essential being, karma yoga will happen. Karma yoga will not need to be stopped, and karma yoga will not need to be done. Karma need not be done. Okay, karma will happen. Karma will happen, and karma will happen for the benefit of the totality. Even if a realized yogi may seem as if he is not doing anything in the world, because of his just being, a lot of things will happen around him. So a lot of karma will happen even though the yogi or the realized being may not be appearing to be doing anything. So this is the subject of the fourth chapter or the fifth chapter. Karma and sannyasa become one. So karma yogi and sannyasi are essentially one. But from the sadhaka's point of view, or from the practitioner's point of view, or from ordinary person's point of view, karma yoga is easier. So because we are all always wanting to do something, no? So okay, do something for the benefit of the totality. So the technique, when we are in the awareness that I'm this body, I would do karma. Then I realize that doing anything well requires some discipline. So for disciplining the mind, we do Ashtanga Yoga, Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi. Unless we do Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana don't happen. Ramesh Dada had just said in a comment here that unless you do Yama, Niyama, all these things won't happen. Correct, absolutely right. So we have to do this Yama, Niyama consciously. So after we graduate from the body identification through Karma Yoga, our mind will become clarified through disciplining it through Ashtanga Yoga. Then we will become Ekagra. Then we will become single pointed and focused on whatever we are focusing on. It could be a deity. Then we will be in the Bhakti path, right? So that is the path of devotion or love, surrender to the Lord, right? Once we do that, once we have done all these three things, that is called Krutopasti. So yatanto yoginaschainam pasyantyatmanyavasthitam yatantopyakrutatmano nainam pashyantya chetasa. That is what Bhagavan says in the 15th chapter, right? So the one who has not done this karma yoga and upasana will not become qualified to understand who one is. So we have to do all of these things, and then we are on the path of jnana, just as you are. So depending upon our aptitude and our capability and our readiness, we can pursue whichever path is appropriate for us. For that, coming to such meetings and satsanga is necessary. But once we come here, we understand these things and we try to practice to the best of our ability. We will eventually get there. So I wish and I pray that all of us will realize our own essential nature while we are in this body, before we leave this body. Thank you very much for spending an hour of your Sunday evening here in America with me, or if you have joined here from Bharat, then early morning. And I hope to see you once again sometime in the near future. Thank you very much.